It's time to go beyond the headlines, cause I don't put in overtime just so I can headline. Okay, now it's Fox Sports, I'm live with Renee. Going hard every day, sports rapping every play. Different segments for your favorites, coming at you daily with positive vibes, yeah, we some game changers. Basketball, football, soccer, with different interviews, you never know who may pop up. Listen, only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines. Only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines. Only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington.
On Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington to get into what we've seen from the opening games and tip-off is Jared Weiss, NBA writer for The Athletic, specifically working with the Boston Celtics. Jared, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here.
Glad to have you here, and I'm excited to hear your takes on what you've seen so far in the start of the NBA season. Let's start up in Boston. The Celtics have had a great start. As we've seen, Kemba Walker has not disappointed in his start with the team. We see a lot of youth really coming in, making an impact. Carson Edwards, Taco Fall, really grabbing the attention of fans. Of course, Jason Tatum being another one as expected, coming back, having another year under his belt. So what are your initial takeaways from the Celtics that you've seen so far? Most recently, they beat the Knicks, which the 0-3 Knicks, maybe not as much of a surprise there, but just in general, your initial takeaways from the Celtics.
Yeah, beating the Knicks isn't a surprise for most teams in the NBA. I think what was a good sign for them is that it wasn't that much of a blowout early on, and then they kind of got their separation in the second half. And most good teams, if you look around the league, they tend to really get their separation in the second half, and sometimes it's just a matter of not really maybe showing up with your full energy that you need for each game right away and kind of figuring it out at halftime. But the Celtics have been getting stronger in the second half, pretty much each one of these games so far this year. So that's been pretty good for them. Kemba Walker was terrible in those first two games. He was dominant in his return back to New York, and I think that's obviously the first thing that they're looking for is to make sure that their star player that they're building their offense primarily around is able to carry the load of that. And, it's not like Kemba Walker forgot how to score after, a couple weeks in Japan and China this year. He's back to being who he is. And then Jason Tatum looks like he's taken a big step forward. Jaylen Brown looks like he's taken a step forward. And Gordon Hayward looks like he's pretty much back to where they hoped he would be. I mean, there's some signs that he's not as explosive as he was before the injury and some of the ways that he was able to create separation or explode past the defender. But for him, his game is mostly about craftiness and shiftiness and quick reactions. And he's still able to do most of what makes him great. And so he's been playing pretty well so far. So there really hasn't been any major weaknesses that they've shown, except for obviously just the terrible shooting and just overall terrible offense they had against Philadelphia in the opening game. But they're still figuring out their center position, and Grant Williams is the rookie out of Tennessee who is wise beyond his years on and off the court and has just been so good so far in some really interesting matchups for him. So I'm excited to see how that looks against Milwaukee later this week, who's going to be a really big test for them.
Yeah. Now, you bring up some great points in the fact that we are seeing the Celtics, players that are returning, Gordon Hayward being one, who's getting back to what he was before that gruesome injury. Jason Tatum coming back and having more experience, more confidence, and you can see that in the way he's playing. Jaylen Brown, another one. But this is a team that last year, going into the season, was predicted with Kyrie Irving, and after the season they had before with Kyrie out with a knee injury in the postseason, to be the top team in the East. They disappointed. They did not live up to that expectation. So do you think now with Kemba Walker as the new leader in general of this team, bringing in some youth, that this is a team that can win the Eastern Conference? I know it's October, but based on what you've seen and these first few games that they've had, what are your initial postseason predictions for how far they can go? Of course, if injuries or nothing drastic changes the look of this team.
Yeah, I mean, the league is open enough this year that a team like Boston, who's got almost everything the contending core would need, but not quite everything, still has the chance to pretty much go as far as they want. I still think Milwaukee and Philadelphia are on their own tier in the Eastern Conference, and I haven't seen anything so far this year to make me think that isn't the case. And those are flawed teams as well. Their flaws probably aren't as important as the Celtics' flaws, but Boston's finding a way to get around them, and Brad Stevens has always been great at figuring out what's the weakness of his team and figuring out a way to kind of cover up for that and, provide as much support and pressure from around it in order to cover up for whatever that hole is. And so, so far they're concerned about how do they find a good two-way player at the 5 because they have a ton of players who are good on one side of the ball or good at one thing or another at the 5. They seem to have found a solution in Grant Williams, and the huge question is that sustainable? Grant's a rookie. Grant didn't have to guard Joel Embiid in that first game. He guarded Marcus Sol, he guarded Mitchell Robinson, he guarded, I think, Julius Randle as well. Like, those guys are all really good, but they're just not Joel Embiid. And so what do you do when you go up against a team with a dominant center like Embiid or Denver or Minnesota? There's so many teams that have elite centers now that can hurt you everywhere on the floor. So I think that's the big question that determines whether or not they really are a championship team. But they have the offensive potential to do it, and it looks like all their wings are taking a step forward from where they were last year at being scorers and distributors. And then, Kemba Walker he's not quite as remarkable and not quite as dynamic as Kyrie is, but I think he's proving that he probably will prove over the course of the year that from a leadership perspective and balancing the offense, that I think he's going to be a better fit. And there's some areas where he's better than Kyrie, and there's some areas where Kyrie is better, but I think the areas where he's better than Kyrie are probably going to prove to be more valuable to this team and the way that they're built. And so I think he's going to be an upgrade for them over what Kyrie gave them the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's something that, we definitely saw last year with Kyrie, that he, given his resume, having won an NBA championship and been an MVP for the NBA All-Star game a couple years back, he, going into the Celtics, wanting to have his own identity, everyone predicted that he would just take them and run and take them to the next level. But as you mentioned with Kemba Walker, he's a talent in himself. He's just a different kind of talent. He's a better fit, in my opinion, with the Celtics than what Kyrie was in the past. And I think that in itself, along with having some new pieces to the puzzle, a tremendous coach in Brad Stevens, they are a team that, although I agree with you, and I don't think that they're ready to and able to beat the Sixers and the Bucks in a best-of-7 series, I do think they're going to be a team that's at least right there competing for that, either the Eastern Conference Championship or semifinals, whatever it may be. They're going to give you a run for their money. And that's the team that I'd hate to match up with in the playoffs.
I think the most interesting question, I want to get your take on this, is, the Celtics, so if they're not quite at that tier with Philadelphia and Milwaukee, are they down at the tier with a bunch of other teams, or are they somewhere between those two?
Yeah, I think they're definitely somewhere in between. And I would say they're right there on the brink of being better than the Sixers and the Bucks, but I agree that they're just missing a piece. You talk about the Sixers with Joel Embiid, with Ben Simmons, the Bucks with Giannis. Kemba is definitely going to step in and be the leader of this team, but are they going to be able to be consistent enough, which is a big part of it, and be able to have the right players step up in crunch time? It's going to be a lot on Kemba, but you're going to need more than just one guy. And I think that's a big thing we've seen this past year with the change of the NBA and the way that some of the, the off-season changes mix up the teams. You now need to have two go-to guys. You need to have two all-stars, two guys that, how we see in L.A. with the Clippers, with Kawhi and Paul George. You've got LeBron and AD. You need two guys that you can run through. And I think that the Bucks are going to struggle at times figuring that out, but Giannis is one of the best players in the league, so he makes up for that. He just needs someone else to step up. But Kemba is not in that top 5, top 10 category of players in the league right now. And so who's going to be number 2? And I think that is where they would drop off in a best-of-7 series, because you have to have him healthy, strong the entire time, the entire game through. He's got to, put on a remarkable performance, and everyone around him has to be playing their best game, in my opinion, to be able to beat a team like the Sixers or the Bucks. Just my thoughts, but we'll see what happens. So you did mention for the Sixers, for one team that we've been talking about, we get a chance to see them play without Joel Embiid, and they went over Detroit. They did work on strengthening one of their weaknesses in the past, which was not having Joel Embiid on the court at times, and now bringing in Al Horford and different players, they now have strengthened an area that was a weakness. But So moving to the West, because we talked enough about the East. I think it just comes down to those three teams of the East. So we'll move on from that. In the West, also getting into some teams that we really have been keeping an eye on. The Warriors, for one. The defending Western Conference champs. The dynasty is definitely over. We saw them lose. We saw them lose to the Thunder earlier this week when they were down by as many as 42 at times. I mean, are you surprised at all that they have dropped in these first initial games that, of course, dropped so far that they just look like a complete opposite team right now at times, offensively and just all aspects?
It's funny. I thought coming into the year that they were going to be a surprise contender. And it's a really small sample size, so it's too early to try to rule them out. But looking at them right now, I don't think I appreciated how weak their rotation was going to look with but they've always struggled over the past few years as they've tried to scrap together a championship team while being deep into the luxury tax, that they haven't really had anybody that can contribute offensively on their own, that can create scoring. And right now, they just have nobody outside of Steph Curry and D'Angelo Russell that can reliably create scoring. And that's really killing them. I mean, their offense is really struggling. And Draymond is not playing that well right now. And he said that they effing suck on the last game, after the last game. And, it's true. It's true. And it's very on brand for Draymond to talk like that. And I hope that serves as a wake-up call for them. And you can always count on him to be the guy that provides that wake-up call. But I don't know how they get over the fact that they only have two guys on the team that can really create their own shot very well, and then someone in Draymond who's a great playmaker and one of the best in his position ever in the game, and still is effective. But he's not really a go-to scorer. You can't really run a ton of different sets to try to get him scoring, and he hasn't been shooting the ball well for the past couple of years. So it's like they're really struggling to find that, and that's a place where they really miss Andre Iguodala, where Iguodala was definitely struggling to score in the last year or so as he's gotten older, but he's still somebody that you can really trust with the ball, and also is a really good spot-up shooter. And that, having to get rid of him in order to maneuver their cap situation this year, that's really, really showing how much it hurts them. So they desperately want Klay Thompson back this year, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think it was very surprising. I know we expected them not to be the same team we saw in the past, of course. Of course, Kevin Durant was hurt in general, but once he was traded, we knew the future was going to change. And then with Klay Thompson being injured, everyone was quick to say, well, they still have Klay and Steph. It's like, they don't have Klay right now. Klay is on the roster. Klay is not on the court. We don't know how he'll be when he gets back. Hopefully he comes back 100% strong. And, you hate to see a player come back and their game drop. We don't know how he's going to come back. And then we also see them without Kevin Looney and Willie Cauley-Stein. And they don't have the inside presence. They don't have the offensive start to side, as you mentioned, from D'Angelo Russell and Steph. So it's like, this is a whole different team that we're seeing. This is very, very shocking.
And you mentioned the two guys that they're missing are centers that don't score the ball. They're pick and roll centers who are defensive specialists. So it's not like there's more reinforcements coming, and they're going to have to hope they can make some sort of trade. And to your point about Klay, when Klay comes back, he's coming back off of a torn ACL. It's like he's not going to be himself. The one saving grace is that Klay Thompson, most of what he does is he's a stationary shooter who is deadly catching and shooting. So, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say most of what he does, because most of what he does is he runs around and drives people crazy, and then he catches and shoots. But he can still just be a deadly spot-up shooter, standing for the most part and not needing to necessarily run people ragged. So if there's anyone that can handle returning from an ACL injury, I think he could be one of the best bets.
Yeah, for sure. Should be interesting. I know everyone's like, well, once he gets back, it'll be different. But that's deep into the season, and there are no guarantees. So we'll see what happens there. But we have also been seeing some excitement from the Western Conference, specifically in L.A. with the Clippers and the Lakers. Of course, that was an exciting showdown between them to start off the season. But since then, we've been seeing the Lakers and Clippers live up to the hype so far. One player that I want to get into, though, of course, everyone and their mom is talking about LeBron James and Anthony Davis, Kawhi and Paul George, but there are some other players that are really standing out to me, the role players. You look at Dwight Howard, Danny Green. What are your initial takeaways from their looking at the Lakers, their start to the season, I mean, I know it's only been a few games, but we have to analyze every single game as if it's been way more than that. What are your initial takeaways from Dwight Howard's return to L.A. and kind of what the role players are bringing for the Lakers?
Oh, well, it's never too early to make grand declarations about the Lakers. It's part of the territory.
Absolutely.
The thing I've been most excited about is Dwight Howard is looking really, he's completely different for one. And I just talked about this on my show this morning, but I remember standing in the back of the stadium at Summer League in Vegas, and Dwight Howard walked by me. And I've seen Dwight probably a dozen times in my life, if not more, up close. And he walked by me, and I'm looking at him, and you know when you haven't seen the person in a long time, and they look really different, and they walk by you, and your brain, the back of your brain's telling you it's that person, but your eyes are telling you it's somebody else. And I had that. I'm staring at him. I'm like, that's Dwight, right? And like he looked physically, he looked like he cut himself in half. It was crazy. He looked so much skinnier. And I don't know if it shows up on TV, but in person he looks so much skinnier. And then he's got like the two big braids going now, which is a very different hairstyle from what he's had in the past. I couldn't even recognize him. And you watch him on the court, and he kind of looks rejuvenated out there. He's moving with purpose. He's moving light-footed. He's playing really good defense. He's playing like he has his antennae up, which he has not played that way for a while. He was kind of really just doing a lot of stat padding when he was in Charlotte last year.
Right.
2 years ago, actually. Didn't even play last year. So it's amazing to see how different he looks. He looks like kind of what you would expect to see of a former MVP caliber player who's kind of on the downslope of their career, but still has a lot to offer. And so I'm excited to see how that transforms over the course of the season because, the truth is that team is designed so that Anthony Davis plays center when it really counts. But Anthony Davis does not like playing center, and he's one that it's frustrating because you want him to play center because he's the perfect center in the modern NBA, but he won't do it. And you know what? They took a huge bet on Dwight, and right now it's looking incredible because Dwight is doing everything that Anthony Davis wants the center next to him to be doing. It gives Anthony room to roam. They still need to figure out how to use Anthony the best, but it's looking like combining LeBron and AD is going to be like this unbelievable pairing at a level that probably not even Kawhi Leonard and Paul George can give you because it's just something, it's just two guys that are just unstoppable relative to their position in a way that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, and I think that's something I keep going back to. So touching quickly on Dwight Howard, I do think not only has his jersey number changed and his look changed, but you do get a different vibe from him. You see him, whether it's on the court in pick and rolls with LeBron or he's giving you a balanced stat line. He's also getting the crowd into it. He did the what looks like the Dikembe Mutombo finger wag after a block. Like he is like a whole different, lighter Dwight Howard. Drama-free, stress-free, looks like he's just out there enjoying playing, which is what you wanted from him once he came into L.A. But then also you look at AD and LeBron, everybody was kind of assuming, and still is to this day, and I'm a LeBron fan, diehard LeBron fan, so I always feel like I'm defending him when they say the Clippers are going to, without a doubt, be the best team in the NBA. And you can't, as you mentioned, you can't go without addressing the fact that these are two 6'8", 6'9", and taller guys that are agile, can play all positions, can shoot, can get to the basket, can rebound. I mean, they can do it all. And who's going to be able to match up with them when you have two of them on the floor? And now you have Dwight Howard. You have Danny Green playing great defense and knocking down shots. You have all these other pieces around them as long as they can stay healthy. So I'm thrilled. Of course, I'm a Lakers fan because I'm a LeBron fan by definition, Lakers fan. I love it. I love what I'm watching. And even with the Clippers, it's great to see them. They've always had players in the past. You look at like a Patrick Beverley, they've been the underdogs. And now to have Kawhi and Paul George in that mix, they kind of now, they have completely turned around to be one of the best teams in the league. So I'm happy for them to have that success too. So do you have any teams? Go ahead.
I was going to say that the Clippers, what's so great about them is they're a team that is very steadily built towards getting where they've gotten to, just like how Houston did a few years ago. And it's really rewarding as someone who cares about the game to see a team put together a long-term plan that seems very ambitious and be able to steadily execute on it. And the build that the Clippers did is pretty incredible. It really contrasts to how the Lakers did it, where the Lakers basically just kind of took a huge swing and somehow managed to land it.
Exactly. They have, and Doc Rivers is a tremendous coach, and they're a team that I'm happy to see them be successful because they did do things the right way. That's exactly it. They're the only team that was able to beat the Warriors at full strength last year in the playoffs, and they already had a lot of the pieces in place. You bring in a couple big-name top players in the league right now with Kawhi and Paul George. They deserve it. Same thing with the Rockets. I mean, we finally got to see what Russell Westbrook and James Harden look like together. And what are your initial takeaways from that duo as everyone's been questioning how they would play together? And we've got to see the Rockets, and they're a fun team to watch.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think is going to take all season for them to figure out. It's definitely pretty clunky of a fit right now. And it was I think that trade was more about getting out of the later years on Chris Paul's deal than anything, because they paid a pretty huge price for a player that I'm not sure how much more effective he is or maybe how much more valuable he is than Chris Paul right now this year. I think Chris Paul can still be very valuable if he's healthy, but Russell Westbrook is such a difficult player to pair with another ball-dominant player like Harden. And, Durant was different because Durant just didn't have the ball in his hands as much as Harden did. But, Houston's whole system really is predicated on Harden having the ball on 90% of possessions, and they need to adjust that. Now, if you have someone like Westbrook that can get into the teeth of the defense at an elite level the way that Harden can, and he's able to kick it out to Harden, then in theory that should make them extremely deadly, and that's kind of what the whole point of the balance between Harden and Chris Paul is supposed to be. The problem is just that Russell Westbrook, when he's out on the ball, he's a difficult player to make useful against a lot of really good defenses. He usually finds a way to do it because he's so hyper-aggressive and he's such a great cutter, but it's still harder to become valuable as a cutter who doesn't really shoot the ball well than just a guy that can be out there and shoot the ball well. So it's going to take them a while to figure it out, but they have the coach to pull it off. And, there's been a lot made of some of the kind of aggressive conversations they've had on the court. Like, those two guys are brothers who, brothers fight all the time. Those are guys that have a deep history, have been friends for a long time, and are super competitive and confrontational. So I don't think that that's going to be a situation where it blows up. I think that's going to be a situation where they're able to try to work it out long term.
Yeah, I agree. I think that their strength is and their weakness of having in the past being confrontational. They're two guys that can handle it. They'll balance each other out. They'll keep each other in check. But something that I really have noticed when I'm watching the NBA in these opening games, it to me looks like a video game. Like when you play 2K or something, you change players around, change teams around. You're stacking your team. You're playing against. So it doesn't look real yet. Like, it still hasn't sunk in that, okay, Russell Westbrook, for instance, wow, he's with the Rockets, or Anthony Davis with the Lakers. It still looks odd to see these players playing together. But there have been some surprises in the new look NBA and some exciting, finishes and things like that as we're watching how these teams unfold. I know Jay Crowder just finished with a three-pointer to let the Grizzlies over the Nets by 1 in overtime. I mean, every single game so far, regardless if it's a blowout like the Warriors getting blown out by the Thunder, it still has its draw because A, the NBA is back, and B, we're finally getting to see how these teams unfold. Do you have any games or any players, maybe a rookie that came into this that's been playing well or less than expected that you've seen in these initial games to start off the season?
Well, I mean, just going to that Jay Crowder reference you just made, John Morant was the star of that game. That was a battle between Memphis and Brooklyn where John Morant was probably outplaying Kyrie Irving in the fourth quarter in overtime. Morant even shut down Irving and blocked his shot on the attempted game winner at the end of regulation. And so it was really exciting to see Morant really find his footing in his third game of his career, be hyper-aggressive, where he's very Westbrook-like in the way that he just can launch himself at the basket from far out. Maybe even John Wall's a better comparison, but he is just a freak athlete, a really creative finisher, a really creative passer, but his defense has been like his major liability and the major question as to how valuable of a player he can be. And, he still is he has a lot to learn, let's say, but the fact that he could lock on to Kyrie and that, Kyrie has been already making fools of people in crunch time in his first couple games of the season, crossing people up and thinking they were the best. And to smother him like that and be able to stuff his shot, it shows that Morant could be a really effective on-ball defender and maybe eventually, be a great two-way player because the offensive talent he has is all the NBA level capabilities. So Morant is going to be the guy to watch with Zion out for the first couple months of the season. That rookie of the year race is going to be really different. It's going to be really, really tight.
I teed it up hoping you would talk about John Morant, because if you didn't, I was going to talk about him anyways, but I could not agree more. That was such a breakout game for him. And to see him have, of course he was tremendous throughout the entire game, but in key moments, to get that block to force overtime, to get the game-winning assist, this is a player that in March Madness, when he was playing at Murray State, we saw how talented he is. We saw his potential. But you're always unsure of how a player is going to translate in the next level. How is their game going to elevate and progress to be able to compete in the NBA? And he, without a doubt right now, definitely already has his name in the category for that Rookie of the Year race and as a player to watch. So I love seeing the quote-unquote underdogs, the players that come from those smaller colleges, the Purdues, the Murray States, that you maybe don't even expect to be able to get to the NBA and do well, and they actually defy all odds and do that and more. So, yes, I could not agree more.
Purdue at least is a major conference team. Murray State, I don't even know what conference they're in. That's a real stretch to come out of Murray State.
Oh, my God, yeah. Exactly. So he's putting them on the map, and he's showing that it was no fluke what he did on the college level, because he is a great player, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does this year. So, Jared, thank you so much for joining the show. Where can our listeners follow you on social media to keep up with your articles and your NBA coverage?
Sure, you can find me, Jared Weiss, NBA, on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to The Athletic. You can read all my stuff there and listen to my podcast there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to an exciting NBA season, and I appreciate you joining us on the show this week to dive into your takeaways from the first couple games. So thank you.